What if everything you're chasing right now, status, security, the next win, turns out to be chasing wind? What if the things you believe will make you whole end up hollow, like a bright ornament that vanishes when you reach for it? If that sounds unsettling, good. Ecclesiastes was written to unsettle comfortable assumptions. It forces us to ask honest questions we usually avoid. In this series, I want to unlock Ecclesiastes for you, not as an abstract lecture, but as a practical map for changing how you live. The teacher, the one most readers connect with Solomon, did not simply preach. He ran experiments. He tried wisdom as a solution. He tried pleasure. He tried building and accumulating. He watched seasons turn and counted the cost of injustice. He sat in the center of experience and tested each path. His verdict is blunt. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Eccles. 1/2, in other words, chasing after wind. That image, wind, hangs over the whole book. Wind moves, it feels real when it touches your face, yet you never grasp it. The teacher wants us to feel that ache, so we will stop mistaking motion for meaning. Before we go deeper, a quick word. If this challenges you, and you want the full Unlocking Ecclesiastes series, subscribe so you won't miss the next sessions, where we turn these insights into daily rhythms that last. He was a man who had resources most of us can only imagine. Wealth, position, access to counsel, the liberty to test things for himself. That matters. The teacher's authority is not theoretical. He speaks from experiments. He pursues the fullest possibilities of human life so he can make a verdict that sticks. That method should shape how we listen. He isn't handing down a sermon from sympathy. He's reporting back from the field. His first discovery. Wisdom is real, but wisdom comes with a cost. He pursued knowledge and found that seeing more of reality also increased pain. He writes, "For in much wisdom is much sorrow, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth grief." Ecclesiastes 1:18. Wisdom opens your eyes to the fractures of the world, the injustice, the broken promises, the fragility of plans. To be wise is to see the cracks, and seeing cracks can be heavy. That is an uncomfortable truth for an age that worships information. We think knowledge will secure us. We collect credentials, subscribe to feeds, measure worth by the speed at which we can find an answer. The teacher flips the script. Knowledge without orientation is exposure. It shows you more things to worry about. It sharpens your conscience and leaves you with the weight of unfixable realities. But the teacher does not reject wisdom. He honors it. He refuses to make it an idol. The point is nuance. Wisdom helps. It also exacts a price. If we treat wisdom as merely a tool for advancing ourselves, using insight to gain leverage, we miss its true use to guide a life shaped by perspective, restraint, and reverence. What do you do differently today? First, name the difference between information and wisdom. When you read, don't only collect facts, ask how they orient your heart. Second, limit the intake that increases anxiety without offering direction. Unplug certain feeds. Refuse the myth that more data equals more security. Third, practice a humble posture. Seek counsel, not just confirmation. Wisdom is a communal resource, not a solitary trophy. After the teacher's first probe, wisdom, he ran the test we all imagine. He pursued pleasure. He entertained life. He allowed himself excess. If knowledge showed him the world's brokenness, indulgence promised to drown the ache. He drank, he sought delight, he built pleasure into his days. Yet the verdict was stark. Pleasure without God as its horizon was temporary. He writes in the candid language of experiment, "I said in my heart, come now, I will prove thee with mirth, and enjoy thyself." Ecclesiastes 2:1. He tried it. It did not satisfy. This is a crucial observation for our culture. Our economy is built on pleasurable escapes. Apps promise bliss by distraction. Shopping malls, streaming platforms, curated experiences. Each is designed to plug the hole. The teacher says, try them. He did. There is joy, beautiful, momentary, even necessary. But when joy is severed from meaning, it becomes a loop. The more you chase it, the more you find yourself chasing wind. Pleasure taught him an important lesson. Delight is a gift, not an idol. Joy is for enjoyment. But when joy becomes a dictator of decisions, when every plan is bent toward the next hit of feeling, it enslaves. There is a difference between enjoying a good meal with gratitude and eating because you need to forget. There is a difference between a weekend away that restores relationships and a weekend that becomes an escape from facing a broken heart. What do you do differently today? First, practice gratitude as a rhythm, not a feeling. Name 3 small God-given delights each day: food you savor, a friendship, a moment of rest. Second, set boundaries around modes of escape. Ask, am I choosing this to connect or to forget? Third, invest in long arc pleasures. Conversation, learning, art, worship. Things that deepen you rather than flatten you. From wisdom to pleasure, the teacher moves to the world of work and building. He built magnificent projects. He amassed wealth. He created systems and left legacies. For a time, it appeared meaningful. But the experiment uncovered another bitter truth. Labor and accumulation can outlive you, and often the fruits go to someone uninterested in your values. In one of his most cutting passages, he observes that a man's toil may be left to someone who did not toil for it, leaving the worker to wonder at the point. Ecclesiastes 2:18-21. The image is stark. All that sweat and care handed to hands that may squander it. It felt like chasing wind. This cuts across our modern sensibilities. We define ourselves by productivity. We measure worth by output. Retirement plans, legacy houses, bank accounts. These are practical and responsible concerns. The teacher is not dismissing responsible stewardship. Rather, he highlights 2 dangers. First, when work becomes a surrogate for identity. Second, when hoarding replaces generosity. We must recover a theology of work that frees us. Work is vocation. It dignifies and contributes to the common good. It shapes character. But if work is pursued primarily for hoarding, for proving status, or for building monuments to ourselves, its meaning frays. The teacher names an alternative. Work can be a place for enjoyment, a gift from God to be received with gladness. Ecclesiastes 3:13 reminds us that God gives the ability to eat and to enjoy the good of all one's labor. To treat work as worship rewires motivation. Practical steps. First, reframe your day. List 3 ways your work serves others: clients, colleagues, community. Let that list prompt small acts of service this week. Second, create a generosity plan. Commit 1 practical act: an hour spent mentoring, a donation, an unexpected meal for someone in need. Third, invest relationally in your work. Identify 1 co-worker to ask about life beyond tasks. Work untethered from relationships and stewardship becomes performance. Joined to service and gratitude, it breathes. The teacher's experiments do not stop at individual pursuits. He turns to time itself, the seasons and rhythms that shape human life. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Ecclesiastes 3:1. He lays out a poem of opposites: a time to be born and a time to die, a time to weep and a time to laugh. This is not mere poetry. It is a diagnosis of how reality is ordered. We live in a culture of immediacy. We expect answers fast, promotions overnight, healing at the push of a button. The teacher insists on an alternative vision. Life has a tempo. There are seasons for planting and seasons for harvest. There are seasons for endurance and seasons for celebration. Acceptance of seasons does not mean passive fatalism. It means learning to dance within the rhythm God gives rather than rage against the clock. This idea shifts our approach to control. We cannot control every outcome, but we can steward our responses. When grief comes, we learn to grieve well. When joy arrives, we learn to receive it gratefully. When injustice rages, we do not pretend the seasons make it right. Instead, we commit to faithful action within the time we have. God has put eternity in our hearts, says the teacher, and yet hides the full meaning. The tension is biblical, longing paired with providence. What do you do differently today? First, create a simple rhythm. Choose one day this week to rest deliberately. A Sabbath moment without productivity guilt. Second, journal the seasons of your life. Identify the current season and name one faithful action appropriate to it. Third, temper immediacy. Before making a major decision, wait 48 hours and test whether it aligns with a longer rhythm. At this point, a question presses in. If wisdom reveals sorrow, pleasure empties, work can mislead, and seasons bring limits, where do we anchor? The teacher leads us toward a surprising pivot. He does not leave us in despair. Even in his realism, he recognizes gifts. He repeatedly points to the simple ability to enjoy food, relationships, and the fruit of labor as gifts from God. Joy is not meaningless when it is recognized as gift. But before we step into that pivot, the teacher's gaze turns to a darker corner, injustice. He sits in the marketplace and watches how the oppressed suffer, how the wicked often prosper, and how judgment seems delayed or absent. These observations bring him to one of his most honest laments. Life is uneven and painful, and righteous outcomes are not guaranteed in this age. He records it with raw authenticity, sometimes expressing that the dead are better off than the living in certain contexts. Ecclesiastes 4:2-3. This is not a sermon against hope. It is an honest accounting of what our fallen world looks like. We cannot gloss over that honesty. Many of us have been stunned by the same realities, systems that crush the least among us, arbitrarily distributed fortune, and the seeming silence of God in moments of deep evil. The teacher urges us not to sentimentalize these problems. He wants us to see them, so our response has moral teeth. How should we respond practically? First, be moved to mercy. Identify one local organization or neighbor in need and take a concrete step. Volunteer, donate, or offer a meal. Second, resist simplistic answers that blame individual failure for structural pain. Educate yourself on one aspect of local injustice and commit to a small advocacy action. Third, cultivate endurance. Outrage without sustained action fades. Choose one long-term commitment you can keep. I want to pause here and let the weight of that question land. How do you live faithfully when the systems around you are unjust and the remedies seem distant? The teacher's method is helpful. Observe, name the reality, then choose faithful practices. But there is another layer that ties these threads together, the necessity of community. Solomon noticed that two are better than one. Work shared is easier. Companionship turns victory into celebration and failure into manageable pain. The image he uses, two people keeping warm, a threefold cord that is not easily broken, reveals a theological anthropology. Humans are created for company, not isolation. Ecclesiastes 4:9-12. In a culture that prizes self-sufficiency, this is a corrective. Community resists the temptation to make personal success the final measure. It provides accountability to our pursuit of wisdom, to our appetites for pleasure, to our work's temptations toward pride, and to our response to seasons and injustice. Community holds us when the teacher's realism becomes heavy. It mediates gifts, so enjoyment is shared and durable. What do you do differently today? First, pick one relationship that has been neglected and take a step, call, meet for coffee, or invite them for a meal. Second, join a small group where life is shared in practical ways: faith, work, losses, joys. Third, practice confession and accountability in one trusted friendship. Vulnerability is not weakness, but a path to healing. Even as community answers many of the isolating tendencies the teacher describes, he insists on a disciplined approach to speech and worship. He counsels measured words before God and others. He warns against rash vows and speaking without thought, because speech can do harm that lingers. This is part of a broader ethical stance. Life requires restraint. Restraint in speech, in promise-keeping, in prideful assertions. Worship for the teacher also becomes a corrective. Approaching God with humility reorients our efforts. Few words, deep reverence, careful vows. These shape a life less given to impulsive pursuit and more attuned to God's economy. The practical upshot is that spiritual disciplines are not extra. They are the framework that helps us live rightly amid ambiguity. What do you do differently today? First, practice short, regular moments of listening prayer, 5 minutes a morning where you listen more than you speak. Second, keep fewer vows and honor the ones you do make. If you promise something, follow through. Third, cultivate a Sabbath language. Name the goodness you've received each week and offer it back as thanks. As we move toward the deeper pivot in the teacher's thought, notice how these elements converge. Wisdom that recognizes sorrow, pleasure that is gift, not substitute, work reimagined as service, rhythms that keep us sane, community that sustains, careful speech and worship that guide our ethics. They are strands woven into a life that resists the illusion of chasing wind. Yet the teacher presses further into the valley of mortality. His images of aging are vivid and poignant: loss of strength, dimming sight, the small humiliations that once felt remote. He watches time erode the body and the structures we rely on. The sunset of life makes the question sharper. If all our efforts fade, what remains? This is the moment where his refrain returns with sobering clarity. Vanity of vanities. It is a verdict, yes, but also an invitation. The teacher wants us to confront the end so we can reorder the middle. Confronting mortality should not drive us to nihilism. The teacher does not leave us without direction. He will point us toward two anchors: the ability to enjoy and the call to fear God and keep his commandments. But before we arrive at that theological hinge, there is an uncomfortable bridge to cross. The teacher's honest depiction of life's futility and frustration raises a question that many modern listeners attempt to avoid. If life is fragile, if systems fail, and if pleasures fade, how do you find steady ground? That question brings us to the heart of transformation. A map of experiments is not enough. Experiments must alter habit. Knowledge must change the rhythm of our days. Pleasure must be reoriented toward gratitude. Work must be reconfigured as stewardship. Seasons must be honored. Injustice met with mercy. Community embraced. Speech and worship disciplined, and mortality reconciled without fantasy. Here is the immediate challenge. For the next 7 days, practice one small experiment the teacher would approve. Do one of these. Take a Sabbath pause. Give a meal to someone who needs it. Cultivate one conversation you have been postponing. The teacher loves experiments because they expose truth. Try one. See how it changes you. Notice what it unmasks. We have walked through the teacher's laboratory: wisdom, pleasure, work, seasons, injustice, community, worship, and mortality. We have paused over each to see the way it can mislead and the way it can heal. The pivot still waits. How does everything find meaning in God's hands? How does the simple act of enjoying become resistance to despair? How does a life shaped by fear of God look different in practice? Those are the questions that lay across the path ahead. Before we proceed, take a moment to feel the tension. The teacher's realism can be heavy. It insists that we will face limits and losses. Yet its honesty is not meant to shrink us, but to free us for honest living. When you remove illusions, you can see what remains. The remaining things, the gifts God gives, the commands God lays down, become the ballast for a life in a storm. In the next section, we will press into the deeper pivot, the theology of enjoyment, the significance of God's sovereignty over time and judgment, and the book's final exhortation, fear God and keep his commandments. Ecclesiastes 12:13. We will also confront the hardest images of the teacher, what to do with his stark words about the wicked prospering, and how to respond when his realism seems to collide with our hope. The journey through these tensions is the path to transformation. For now, let the wind image linger. Look at your days and ask, what am I chasing that feels like wind? Where have I taken a good thing and turned it into a god? Which relationships need tending because I've poured my life into projects instead? Which rhythms, work, rest, worship, are out of tune? Make a note. Choose one experiment this week. Try it not as a religious obligation, but as a test. See what shifts. Watch closely. The teacher did, and that willingness to test is the beginning of a transformed life. Now we press into the heart of the teacher's pivot, the turning where his laboratory notes become a way of life. After cataloguing wisdom's sorrow, pleasure's emptiness, the limits of work, the rhythms of time, the ache of injustice, and the necessity of companionship, he refuses to leave us in despair. Instead, he points to two converging truths that reframe everything. God gives the ability to enjoy, and God alone is the final judge. These are not tasteful add-ons to a grim book. They are the hinge upon which transformation swings. First, enjoyment is not frivolous. The teacher insists that simple God-given delight is a proper, even holy part of life. He writes in one of his clearest lines about vocation and joy, God gives to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. Ecclesiastes 2:26. Elsewhere he says plainly that it is good to eat, drink, and be merry in the context of one's labor. Ecclesiastes 3:13. These statements might jar us if we expect piety to look like austere resignation. For the teacher, enjoyment is the right response to God's provision, the faithful reception of gifts received. This revalues ordinary pleasures. A shared meal, a day of rest, laughter with a friend. These are not distractions from meaning. They are evidence of it. They are resistance to the chasing wind that reduces life to consumption and achievement. When enjoyment is conscious and acknowledged as a gift, it heals the urge to turn pleasure into an idol. It teaches gratitude, not that good things make God true, but that God makes good things possible. Practically, this means we must relearn how to receive. Start small. At one meal today, name aloud one good thing you are grateful for before you eat. Make permission to enjoy a regular matter. Allow yourself 45 minutes this week to do something purely for delight. Read a book for pleasure, take a walk without a to-do list, savor a cup of coffee quietly. When you engage a pleasurable thing, resist the quick mental calculus of, what will this do for me? And simply say, thank you, locating the pleasure within the context of God's goodness. Second, God's sovereignty over time and judgment. The teacher is painfully honest about apparent injustices, the wicked who prosper, the oppressed who languish. He is so candid that at moments his voice slips into a kind of bitter astonishment. Yet even his dismay points beyond cynicism toward a theological posture. He keeps returning to the idea that God is ultimately in charge of time and of accounting for deeds. That does not erase the reality of suffering, nor does it grant us complacency. Rather, it reframes endurance. We live faithfully now, aware that not all stories end in this life, and that God's wisdom and timing often remain hidden. This is the most delicate interpretive work the teacher asks of us. When he notes that the righteous sometimes suffer and the wicked sometimes flourish, Ecclesiastes 8:14, 9:2-3, he is not presenting a doctrine of fatalism, he is naming a lived paradox. Earthly outcomes are erratic, but that irregularity does not cancel God's justice. The book refuses easy answers. The proper response to this tension is not despair or a retreat into simplistic revenge fantasies. It is measured trust and persistent action. We must act to alleviate suffering and speak for justice while recognizing that the world's ledger does not always balance in our sight. So what does that look like in daily practice? When you encounter systemic injustice, do not shrug and say, "Solomon said life is meaningless." Instead, do three concrete things. Learn one local story of need and let it shape your prayer. Join one local effort that addresses that need in a small, sustained way. And practice patience in outcomes. Measure faithfulness by fidelity to the work, not by immediate results. The teacher's realism should be a spur to durable compassion, not an excuse for passivity. There are hard verses that press us to careful handling. Consider the passages that sound most jarring to modern ears. Statements that suggest the dead are sometimes better off than the living, Ecclesiastes 4:2-3, or that express profound bitterness toward temptation, Ecclesiastes 7:26. These lines are not doctrinal manifestos. They are fragments of a soul in experiment and observation. They record the teacher's struggle to make sense of life when it looks most chaotic and cruel. Pastoral sensitivity is required here. We must acknowledge the pain behind his words, resist turning them into theological blunt instruments, and avoid weaponizing them against those who suffer or those who are vulnerable. When he speaks strongly about desire and danger, take it as a warning about the power of lust and the allure of idols, not as a blanket indictment of any particular person or gender. A faithful reading refuses two bad moves, either to sentimentalize the world into neat answers or to weaponize Scripture into harsh condemnations. Instead, the teacher invites us to stay with the messy reality and to cultivate moral imagination, grit, compassion, and prudence, so we can be agents of healing. Practically, this means learning language for lament and refusing glib answers when tragedy hits. It also means building safe practices in our communities, where grief is met with presence rather than platitude. Returning to the pivot, these twin truths, joy as gift and God's sovereign judgment, culminate in the teacher's arresting final verdict: fear God and keep his commandments, Ecclesiastes 12:13. That phrase is the anchor, not a tacked-on moralism. Fear God, in the biblical sense, is not mere dread, but a reverent orientation of the heart, a posture that recognizes God's glory, holiness, and ultimate authority. To fear God is to center one's life under the weight of that reality, allowing vocation, pleasure, and relationships to be seen through God's perspective. Keep his commandments flows from that reverence. Obedience is not legalism here, but the way that fearing God shapes daily living. The teacher's conclusion is not an escape hatch from sorrow. It is the only reliable compass he found in his experiments. How does reverent fear look practically? Here are 3 daily practices that embody it. Cultivate a short morning habit of attention, 2 minutes of quiet where you name God's presence and your dependence. Structure one decision each week by asking, does this honor God and my neighbor? And keep a simple accountability practice with one trusted friend where you confess temptations and celebrate faithful small steps. These practices orient the heart away from idols and toward a life that sees gifts as gifts and responsibilities as responses. Now let us pull these strands together into the concrete lessons promised in the title. 7 powerful lessons from Ecclesiastes that, when lived out, will transform how you make decisions, manage desires, and steward time. Lesson 1. Recognize the difference between movement and meaning. Motion is not purpose. Hustle yields activity, but not necessarily value. The teacher's image of chasing wind should make you suspicious of anything that promises meaning through constant motion. The antidote is intentionality. Before you commit to a new pattern, another course, a promotion, an endless volunteer role, ask whether this fits the story you want to live and whether it bears fruit in relationships and service. Practice a one-question litmus test for new projects this month. Will this deepen my connection to God and neighbor, or will it primarily inflate my resume? Lesson 2. Reclaim enjoyment as a spiritual discipline. Pleasure is a gift when received rightly. Gratitude makes enjoyment an act of worship rather than an escape. Each day, rehearse 3 small thanks and keep one evening a week free for simple pleasure without guilt. Let enjoyment become a regular language for acknowledging God's provision. Lesson 3. Reframe work as stewardship, not identity. Your vocation matters because it serves others and shapes you, but your worth is not derivative from productivity. At work this week, identify a concrete way your labor benefits someone else and act on it. Help a colleague, mentor a junior team member, or perform an act of unexpected service. Don't let your calendar be the only judge of value. Lesson 4. Respect seasons. Resist the tyranny of immediate answers. Life moves in rhythms, and wisdom lies in discerning them. Create a simple rhythm for your weeks and months. Sabbath rest, focused work blocks, and reflection times. Before making a major decision, wait 48 hours and consult a friend. Let seasons chew on your choices so you are not seduced by the rush to remedy every discomfort. Lesson 5. Respond to injustice with persistent mercy and humble action. The teacher's realism must move you towards sustained compassion. Identify one local injustice and commit to a small, measurable action for 3 months. Volunteer, advocate, or donate. Resist instant anger that burns out. Choose endurance that builds institutions and relationships. Lesson 6. Invest in relational resilience. There is power in companionship. Cultivate at least one relationship this month that is not about utility, but about mutual bearing. Call someone you've neglected, schedule an undistracted meal, and practice asking honest questions and listening. Strengthen a 3-fold cord in your life by building depth in friendship, family, and faith community. Lesson 7. Live under God's judgment with reverent fear. Let the reality of God's oversight recalibrate your priorities. Keep small vows and honor them. Practice measured speech. Make decisions as if eternity matters, not in fear of punishment, but in the humility of being known. This posture protects you from the idols of instant self-glorification. Each lesson requires a practical next step. Pick one lesson to experiment with for the next 7 days. If you choose lesson 1, stop one autopilot commitment and assess whether it aligns with your long-term story. If you choose lesson 2, enact the 3 daily thanks practice. If you choose lesson 3, perform one act of workplace service without seeking recognition. Whatever you choose, treat it as an experiment, as the teacher would. Try it honestly, observe, adjust, and then repeat. There is another layer the teacher insists upon, the role of speech and worship in shaping a life that resists vanity. He warns against rash words and empty promises. He repeatedly points to measured speech as moral technology. In our age, where words thunder across digital platforms and instant responses have become the norm, Ecclesiastes calls for restraint and accountability. Think of speech as a small gate that, when managed, keeps a whole inner economy healthy. Practice 3 habits this week. Slow your initial replies for 1 conversation a day. Avoid amplifying rumor or unverified claims, and intentionally affirm one person each day with words that build. Worship, likewise, is not a private aesthetic, but a reformation of desire. Keep worship simple and deliberate, short times of listening, confession, and thanksgiving that recenter you away from idols. The teacher's stark images of aging demand a final word. His catalogue of bodily decline is unflinching, and it can feel bleak. But the point is not to depress us, it is to sharpen our devotion now. Remember your Creator in your youth. Ecclesiastes 12:1 is not a call to morbid early worry, but a summons to live with foresight. Aging reframes ambition. What you build now must be judged by whether it fosters character and stewardly relationships. Begin a legacy practice. Write a one-page letter to someone younger. Share a hard-won lesson, a caution, an encouragement. If you cannot write, speak it aloud and record it. Legacy is not just money, it is wisdom transmitted. We must also guard against two misreadings. First, do not read Ecclesiastes as nihilism that negates effort. The teacher repeatedly affirms enjoyment, work, and justice. Second, do not use it as a fatalistic rationale for moral neglect. Vanity names the insufficiency of misplaced ultimate trust, not the pointlessness of all human action. The teacher wants sober action, engaged, humble, and grateful. At this point, let us rehearse a concrete, 7-day transformation pathway that marries the teacher's experiments to modern practice. It is intentionally simple. Small acts that create new grooves of habit. Day 1. Sabbath test. Choose a half-day where you will not pursue productivity. Eat a meal slowly. Name 3 things you noticed and enjoyed. Day 2. Gratitude habit. Write 3 short notes of thanks, texts to people, or a small journal entry identifying gifts you would otherwise take for granted. Day 3. Stewardship act. Perform one small act of service at work or in your neighborhood without publicizing it. Let the act be its own recompense. Day 4. Relationship repair. Call someone you've neglected and invite them into a genuine conversation. Ask a question you usually avoid. Day 5. Justice intro. Learn one short story about a local need and do a small, concrete follow-up. Donation, a contact, or a volunteer sign-up. Day 6. Speech discipline. Practice measured speech across the day. Before replying to messages, pause and ask whether your words will build or break. Day 7. Reflection and commit. Spend 30 minutes reviewing the week. What felt like chasing wind? Which small practices produced real peace? Choose one of the 7 lessons to continue practicing for the next month. These steps are intentionally modest. The teacher's experiments were experiments because they were repeatable and observable. Spiritual formation is not the result of one grand overhaul. It is the accumulation of small, faithful acts that rewire desire. Before we close, we must face a final tension the teacher lays bare, the paradox between God's hiddenness and human longing. He says, with a sort of gravitational honesty, that God has placed eternity in our hearts, but also has hidden fully what God is doing. Ecclesiastes 3:11. That paradox can either wound us into an anxious frenzy of searching or steady us into a trust that embraces mystery. The transformed life the teacher envisions is one that holds both, the longing and the humility, together. How do we live with such ambiguity? We adopt practices that allow longing to be honest, without becoming frantic. Prayer becomes a place where we lament and hope without resolution. Community learns to sit with unanswered questions without turning them into bad theology. Work becomes a place of fidelity, not frantic meaning-making. Enjoyment becomes a sacrament, small, true, and bounded. As we bring this study to a close, here are 5 concise takeaways you can carry into your week. These are the distilled, practical claims of Ecclesiastes for transformed living. 1. Name the wind. Identify one thing in your life that feels like endless motion without deep purpose. Pause it. Assess motives. 2. Receive gifts. Practice gratitude daily and reclaim one pleasure as a sacrament of God's provision. 3. Reorient work. Serve someone through your vocation this week without expectation of return. 4. Commit to community. Deepen one relationship by asking a vulnerable question and listening. 5. Live under God's sovereignty. Make one decision this week through the lens of, does this honor God and neighbor, rather than, will this advance my image? These steps are not a checklist to spiritual perfection. They are experiments, small trials the teacher would recognize. Try them honestly and watch how the texture of your decisions changes. Finally, the teacher's closing word must be honored as the theological core of everything we have walked through. He does not end with despair or with abstract triumphalism. He returns to a sober command. Remember his final charge. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Ecclesiastes 12:13. He offers no magic formula, only a reorientation that shapes how we pursue wisdom, pleasure, work, time, justice, companionship, speech, and even how we face aging. Fear God and obey. This is the frame that keeps our experiments from becoming idols. Now, a pastoral challenge. Choose one of the lesson pathways above and commit to practicing it for the next 7 days. Treat it like the teacher would. Observe honestly, take notes about what changes inside you, and be willing to adjust. Make your experiment public to one trusted friend so you can have someone to celebrate progress with and to keep you honest. If this teaching has touched you, take one practical step today. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it. And in the comments, name which of the 7 lessons hit you hardest. That small act of sharing joins a community of people trying experiments together, people willing to stop mistaking motion for meaning. Ecclesiastes does not give us tidy answers. It refuses false assurance, but in its realism it offers a way forward, a life reoriented toward the gifts of God, shaped by reverent fear and committed to neighborly faithfulness. When we stop chasing wind, we find space to enjoy what is real and to serve what matters. Fear God, keep his commandments, and let the small experiments of faithful living transform your days.